So welcome to our second program of the season, and I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. You get a raise of hands of how many veterans there are in here? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, yeah, okay, that's good, that's good. There's a lot of us. You don't realize how many there are. Janine back there has a book. It lists all the people from Whatcom County that were in the service in World War I. The book is quite thick. There were several hundred people here. I think on the opening day of the sign-up, there was like 300 and some people signed up from here. So that's how it all got started. World War I was the war to end all wars. We know that. But it didn't end up being that, which is a shame. By the end of November in 1918, there had been 40 million military and civilian casualties in Europe. 20 million deaths, 9.7 million military. That was 5.5 million of the Allies and 4 million of the centrists, which was, of course, Germany and Austria mostly. There were 165,000 Germans killed in one battle, the Battle of Somme. It started on July 8, 1914, and ended on November 11th in 1918. By the end of August of 1914, France had 266,000 casualties. Now, they lost so many men that they lost a whole generation of men. So between the ages of 20 and 30, they just didn't have them after the war. The trench warfare, mass frontal assaults, can't get much worse than that. Oh yes, the gas. The U.S. joined on April 2nd, 1917. By the end, 3 months later, they'd already suffered 50,000 casualties. That's a lot. But if you put it in perspective, Gettysburg had 50,000 casualties in 3 days. That's dead and wounded. Did that to ourselves. The 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, there was an armistice called, ceasefire. People were pretty happy. So, on November 11th, 1919, they declared Armistice Day. That was in memory of all the people who had fought in World War I. And in 1926, it became an annual observance worldwide. And of course, in this country in 1938, it became a national holiday. It was also changed named to Veterans Day about that time. Actually, I think in 1971 or something. So it was a memoriam to those who had fought and died, or those who had joined and were living, as versus Memorial Day, which is a day of memory of those who died in war. So, having said all of that, we have with us tonight, we have a member of the American Legion and a member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and they're going to give us a talk on what that is and what it means to them and to us. So I'm going to call Al Jensen up.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Again, I'm Al Jensen. I'm the current post commander of American Legion Post number 7 here in Bellingham, the Albert J. Hamilton Post. I'd like to give you a little bit of history about the American Legion. We are the largest veterans organization in the world right now, currently have 4 million plus members. We're actually one of the few organizations that are actually chartered by Congress. The American Legion started in March 1919, after World War I, with it. Members of different organizations met in France, where the armistice was signed, and the decision was to start forming the American Legion across the country. In fact, our first post in the American Legion still exists in France today. We have posts in all 50 states, all our territories, and numerous foreign countries often. In September that year, the United States Congress actually chartered the American Legion. So we still work under that charter. Some of it's been rather cumbersome. When we first got chartered, you had to have served during a time of conflict in order to be an American Legion member. We worked for years to try to change that. It was really hard to tell somebody that missed a conflict by 5 or 6 days that, hey, we thank you for your service, we call you a brother or sister, but you can't be part of us. That just wasn't right. Finally, 2 years ago, after years of work, we got the American Legion bill through Congress, and Congress adopted it, saying now that as long as you have honorably served in the United States military, you can be a member of the American Legion. What that did is open up our membership to about another 4 million people with it. So we have been really proud of that we're bringing people in. Our post here, we are the largest post in the state of Washington. We have about 800 and some plus Legionnaires, a very active auxiliary unit, Sons of the American Legion with it. We are one of the oldest posts. In fact, we are the oldest post in the state of Washington. We just received a certificate from the Secretary of State of our incorporation being over 100 years old. And I think there was 14 other membership organizations in it. So we're kind of proud of that. We're out on 1688 West Bakerview. We just had our big Veterans Day ceremony today, had a great crowd. What happened with it in the book that's back there, I think Albert J. Hamilton is number 10 in the book. But he was the first casualty that lived in the city of Bellingham. And that's why his name was selected as the name of our post. A little history on him is kind of unique. He was born here in Bellingham in August of 1893. As a boy, he attended Columbia School, and his boyhood friends, this is direct from his obituary in the Bellingham Herald. Boyhood friends bear witness to the fact that he did his share of upholding the school laurels on the diamond and gridiron. So I'm assuming he was a pretty good athlete. Albert followed the lead of his father and chose railroad contracting as a life work upon leaving school. He left a post as a foreman of the rail construction crew to enter the service of the United States at Bellingham on October 5th, 1917. One of the many people from here that volunteered. On arriving at Camp Lewis, Hamilton, because of his railroad training, was offered assignment to the Spruce Division of the Army. Hamilton chose to remain in the infantry and was sent to Camp Mills, New York, and became a member of the Company K, 128th Infantry, 32nd Division. Before crossing to France, he was promoted to the rank of private first class. He took part in numerous battles throughout France. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce some of the names. But it was during a battle on October 16, 1918, that Hamilton was wounded. Him and some other soldiers were on their way back to an aid station when they were attacked with mustard gas. He ended up dying from his wounds on October 25th after 10 days of suffering poison from mustard gas with it. His body was not returned to Bellingham until August 21st, 1921. Most of the time in World War, our casualties were put in warehouses throughout France, and there wasn't the time or the facilities to ship them back. Well, he came back on August 21st, 1921, and was laid to rest in Bayview Cemetery. According to his obituary, there were over 5,000 people on the streets of Bellingham, lining the streets for his procession and at his cemetery. You think back at that time, that's a lot of people in Bellingham. But he was the first. One And it was funny, the adjutant said at his graveside, "We need no monuments to mark this spot. Bronze and marble will crumble away, but the memory of his glorious deeds will remain forever." Those are pretty profound words then. At our post, we have the flag that draped his coffin that came all the way from France. The family presented that to us, along with the original telegraph that was sent to his mother and father advising him of his death. He would have been 28 years old on the Saturday after his funeral. That's how young he was. So Bellingham has a unique history coming into World War I and at the end of World War I. Even though the American Legion wasn't built, there was a huge outcry throughout the United States on Americanism, patriotism, and the stop of communism. And organizations were established all over small communities. And here in Bellingham, they took the name of the Legion of Liberty. And they would recruit sometimes 300 to 400 members a day to join the Legion of Liberty. And all you had to do had to serve in the military and denounce communism and Americanism. What they were doing at that time was, people don't realize that a good majority of the soldiers in World War I never got paid. I mean, there wasn't really a good pay system, and what were you going to do with the money in the trenches of World War I anyway? So they came home and they had money owing them. A lot of them had injuries and disabilities. So this Legion of Liberty got together, and they were the ones to make sure that they would get their money, which was pittance at that time after being in a war for up to 2 years, and helped them find jobs. At one point, the Legion of Liberty basically controlled most of the employment in Bellingham. Most of our employment here was in the logging industry. And according to some of the old minutes, that all the woods bosses, when there was openings at the various lumber mills or logging sites, they called the Legion of Liberty first. And they would dispatch people to get them jobs. How many of you remember or know where the original Legion building in Bellingham is, down at the end of Commercial Street? It used to be Blackburn Office Equipment. You look, that's the American Legion. How that came about was, it was actually under the Legion of Liberty. One of the local organizations, Chamber of Commerce, and believe it or not, one of the labor unions felt that, okay, the Legion of Liberty needed a place to meet. They needed their own building. So they took it upon themselves and went to the city. The city ended up donating the land, but then the county had to go ahead and donate, and they basically gave the Legion of Liberty the land. So then all the labor unions got together, and they would meet at the Oddfellows Hall up on Holly Street, and the ladies would cook breakfast, lunches, and dinners, and the wave of people would come down and build this building down there. Well, it was supposed to be done in a year. That didn't work. After about a year and a half, it was not totally completed. And the president of the Central Labor Council at that point, and they lost interest in volunteers. It's like everything today. You lose volunteers. So they weren't getting there. So the Central Labor Council decided that they needed to get this building done. So they actually planned together, and they donated $1,130 worth of material to finish the building, and had union contractors or carpenter members go in and finish it. We amortize this out. That donation today would be close to $6 million, what they did. But they built that building, and it became the headquarters for people that were the veterans that came back, and eventually as the American Legion with it. And it became a community center. There was dances there, and it was where everyone went with it. And then shortly, this was 1919, they decided to go ahead and put an application in to the state chairman of the American Legion. And actually, the application had to be hand-delivered. So 3 gentlemen took horseback from Bellingham to Olympia in order to turn in the application for this post here in Bellingham from it. And then that was dated July 5th, 1919, and it was amazing, some of the names there. Most of the people, the Donovans, Bloedel Donovans, all the leaders in the community were all of the original ones there. They drew up their Constitution bylaws in 1919, and they held a mass meeting and had about 600 people there with it, elected officers, and then shortly later that year, they were awarded their charter from the National Association, and they became the American Legion from there with it, and we've been active ever since. With the thing. And some of the first things that they did, it was kind of unique that, again, they really pushed the jobs with it, and there was a big push in some of the labor camps, especially the lumber mills, from an organization that was, according to the minutes, were a very active communist organization. And the actions that they took against that, and to get in and get the people in the jobs, and it actually resulted in almost some riots that went in the logging camps and stuff to make sure that actually veterans were the ones to be able to get the jobs. And you have to understand that at that time, any of the veterans that came back injured, there wasn't any real medical treatment for them. The VA didn't exist. There wasn't medical treatment at all. And I still haven't found that each post at that time, had a surgeon, and they were an actual medical doctor. And they were usually, in Bellingham here, was somebody that was very prominent in the medical community. I've yet to find out what exactly the surgeon did. It's not dictated in the minutes, but it made sure to tell who the surgeon was, and he was a very active member of the post. So I'm assuming that there was probably some free medical treatment there, at least for veterans, because they didn't make a lot of money back there. I mean, some of their back pay was, $50, $60 with it, and came back. So that's how it started here, and we're still going strong here. Like I said, we're the largest post in the state of Washington, and we're really happy that we're really we're diversifying on our post. Being a Vietnam veteran, I remember when I came back, even though I didn't serve in country, I was during the Vietnam era, you didn't talk about being a veteran. Coming back from that war, you didn't talk about it. You just came back and did your thing. It was not a welcoming war. It wasn't a welcoming time home. I didn't I remember I went to the Legion a couple times. I went up to VFW, I think, a couple times. I just went on. I didn't join any kind of veterans organization until 10 years ago, when I actually retired, almost close to retirement. And I thought, okay, we'll do this. I was wrong. I should have been there long before. It's an honor to be a part of our veterans organizations. It is a brotherhood. We really take care of our brothers and sisters with it, and it's like today we had 150, 175 people out there with it. Everybody understood what we were there for, but now it's an honor. It's an honor to wear this uniform. It's an honor to wear this hat with it. I'm fortunate. I travel all over the state of Washington and also hold a national office, so I get to travel and see posts across the state and the country. And it's nice to see the comradeship now. We're all finally talking to each other again. We're giving each other the hug. We're giving each other shakes. And I remember what kind of kicked me off as an old Vietnam vet. He asked me one time, he was in our post, and he says, "Why don't you wear your Vietnam colors or your Vietnam ribbons?" I says, "I didn't serve in combat, so I'm not worthy. I'm not doing it." And he looked at me and he says, "What you did and everyone else did, we all fought the same war." He did 3 tours as a canine handler in Vietnam. And what he told me kind of woke up. This is right. We're all veterans, and we're here to help each other. So that's what we're here for. It's a brief history of the American Legion. We're proud of our post out here. Come on out and see us. We're slowly coming out of COVID. We're not real fast, but we're getting there. So any questions on the American Legion? Right now, our charter is to support and maintain the welfare of veterans. So we have activities going for the families. We're really pushing our younger veterans right now. We're finding the veterans that are coming out of Afghanistan, Iraq, they're in a shell. They don't want to talk to anybody. We want to have things that them and their families can feel comfortable to. So it's the support of those. We have a very active veterans assistance program to where we can give funds and stuff there to veterans that need it. But it's just putting that support out, and we do that support through our auxiliary, through our Sons of the American Legion. Those are members that they haven't served in the military themselves, but they have mothers, fathers, grandfathers, grandpas, grandmothers that serve, they can come in. They have full membership. We have a juniors program in the auxiliary to start teaching what Americanism is to younger kids and bringing them up with it. So our whole thing is community support and supporting each other. We have veterans that go from World War II all the way to active duty. One of the things we do is, like, if we have any active duty military members that are from here, we pay their membership dues to the American Legion as long as they're in active duty. That way they can, no matter where they get shipped to, they can enjoy the comradeship of the American Legion. So, anything else? Thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
He was supposed to tell us a little bit about what he did. Yeah, okay. So, having given Al a chance at it, I got John Furden from the VFW.
I got a hat too. Plus, I can get rid of this darn thing. First off, and Wes, don't start the clock yet, please. A little truthfulness and enclosures and what have you, and because I'll make up, since Al didn't talk about himself, I'm going to talk about me. And first thing I ask you to understand is I'm a product of the Florida public education system. And so, you got to bear with me because I've dealt with that for a long, long time. The other thing that I ask you to understand is, I got all this stuff hanging on me. And with the exception of the very first year of my career, I was a commissioned officer. And the thing about that is I was just a guy with a Florida public education. And so I didn't do anything special. In fact, I think I was kind of one of those officers where it's written, the only reason anybody would follow this officer is out of idle curiosity. And so, it's just one of those things. You hang around long enough and things happen. Because I'm addressing the Historical Society, talking about me, I wanted to include some things in the history of my career that might be of interest to you. And I will tell you, first off, I was a staff officer in the Army for a number of years. And anytime you were preparing a staff paper, all right, you got to address the 5 W's. The who, what, why, when, and where. And so that's basically how I built this little presentation. So bear with me. First off, I am, in fact, John Furden. I'm 76 years old. Out of those 76 years, I spent 41 of them with the Army. And fortunately, I have a lovely and talented wife that's here tonight, Margot. Next month, we will be having our 37th wedding anniversary. I have 2 daughters from a previous marriage and 5 granddaughters. What do I like to do? Like Al said, I think my number one interest is to help veterans and their families and community service, like here, now. I am the VFW Post Adjutant, have been for several years. I'm a life member of the VFW the Vietnam Veterans of America and the Disabled American Veterans. And I've also just been elected as a member of the board of directors of the Whatcom Memorial Day Parade. And there will be a parade next May. We're already starting to work on it. So mark your calendars, 26 May, we'll be there. What I like to do, gosh, I love reading, and especially military history, both factual and historical novels, Jeff Sarra and what have you. Love to travel. That's kind of gone by the wayside for the last couple of years. I do love horseback riding. I do that as much as possible. And I have a bunch of hummingbirds that I take care of year-round, and that's always fun. So I will tell you that I became an Army veteran beginning in 1967. And I went through basic and AIT, Advanced Individual Training at Fort Dix. And when I came out of that last bit of training, my specialty was as an anti-tank gunner. And history. One of the weapons that we were trained on was a 3.5-inch recoilless rifle. And it was shoulder-mounted. Yeah, I see, Wes. And shoulder-mounted, and you know, it was a big tube, and all of the energy and everything came out the back. So you had to be careful. You didn't want to stand back there. Well, this weapon was introduced into the Army in 1953. And so here we are, we're a bunch of trainees now in 1967 trying to operate this thing. So what you do is you got it up on your shoulder, you got a loader, he puts the rocket in there, okay? And so you're all set to go. You spot the tank down there, and you know, he's gonna wish he wasn't there. And so click, nothing happened. Click, click, nothing happened. Well, I know you remember all this, Wes. So the immediate action is, well, you reach back there, and there's a piece of copper that runs around that rocket. And when you go click, well, there's kind of an electrical charge that hits through there, and then boom, off goes the rocket. So the first thing you do is you reach back there and you twist that rocket. And so hopefully you can get a better connection. Okay, so you're back there doing that. Click, nothing. So then when that fails, what you do is you tip the tube upside down and you shake the rocket out of there, right? Okay, it ain't moving. So I turned to our platoon sergeant, Sergeant Jones. This thing ain't coming out. He said, okay. He said, I want you to hold it, and then I want you to get behind the thing, and I want you to push that thing all the way down the tube until you can get it to fall out. So here, and I said, Sergeant Jones, are you sure you want me to do this? And he said, oh yeah. He said, this is good training for you. So sure enough, you know, I stick my arm in that tube, and you know, and I'm up to here, you know, with that rocket sitting right out there. What could possibly go wrong? But at any rate, we got the rocket out of there, and we all lived happily ever after. But that was, you know, just kind of the things that we were dealing with in 1967, a lot of Korean War stuff was left over. We were issued 45 caliber pistols. You go out and shoot it and pieces were falling off of it. So, it was high adventure at times. So at any rate, after got that, I went to Infantry OCS, Fort Benning, in 1968. And in August of that year, I was a second lieutenant of infantry, which is probably the most worthless thing anybody wanted to see was a second lieutenant of infantry. But nonetheless, so I did that and wound up actually with a career of, like I said, more than 41 years. And so it was interspersed. I had 4 overseas tours in 3 different countries, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. The big thing was, once I got out of OCS, I had a very short assignment at Fort Stewart, Georgia, 6 months. And that was the norm back then for infantry lieutenants coming out of school. You give them 6 months of stateside service, you're going overseas. And most likely you're going to go directly to Vietnam. In my case, I went directly to Seoul, Korea. And I was assigned to the headquarters of the Korean Military Advisory Group, KMAC. And what that organization did was, as it sounded like, was we provided support to the Korean Army. Training and exercises and all that kind of stuff, how to maintain vehicles and what have you. And so I did that for about 6 months, but in that short period of time, I was the XO for the Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics at KMAC. He was full colonel, a veteran of the Korean War. And there were still quite a number of Korean War veterans on active duty. A few World War II veterans were still on active duty. And while I was there, I met a colonel who had been on the Bataan Death March. And he looked it. But what I started to realize in that short period of time was I'm around some pretty special people. We've got a big job to do, but these are people who were professionals. They knew their job. They knew how to train others to do the job. And so I made a decision. And that was, initially I was on a path that would have me 2 years of active duty and then go off, and the rest of my tour would be reserve and everything. And I decided that I wanted to stay longer. And so I changed my contract, if you would, to one that says voluntary indefinite, which means I remain on active duty as long as the Secretary of the Army allows it. And so what I found myself doing next was I was transferred down to Busan, southern end of Korea, to our KMAG detachment down there. And I had my first command assignment then. I commanded the troops that were in our part of the headquarters company. And included in that were a bunch of, they call them Katyusha soldiers, Korean augmentation to the United States Army. They were Korean troops under my command, and that was very, very interesting. And while I was over there, I had a very special opportunity to, on board ship, we would take Korean troops from Pusan into South Vietnam. And they would always have a KMAG officer to accompany them. And it was a real eye-opener to watch Korean Army discipline. They were no-nonsense people, believe me. And so we did that. And we went to 2 ports in South Vietnam, Da Nang and Nha Trang. And the interesting thing about Nha Trang was we were in the harbor. And I noticed there were a lot of small boats that were constantly circling our ship, troop ship. And what they were doing was throwing concussion grenades over the side to try to dissuade any VCs that were trying to come up and attach mines to our hull. And so that went on just the whole time that we were in the harbor. And then on the return trip, we would police up the Korean troops that had served in South Vietnam and bring them back home. So that was from 1969 to 1971 that happened. And just before my tour ended there, I decided to volunteer for Vietnam. And so in August of 1971, I wound up back in Da Nang, but as a member of the 196 Light Infantry Brigade that was stationed in Da Nang. And when I got there, the brigade was reeling because they had one of its battalions completely overrun on Firebase Marianne, completely overrun. There were about 250 soldiers on Firebase Marianne. They had 82. They had 82 wounded and 30 killed. And many of those that were wounded and killed were not even able to get out of the culvert house that we lived in out there. The VC got through the wire and started throwing satchel charges into those culverts. So troops never even got out of them to defend themselves. As a result of that action, the battalion commanders who was on Firebase Marianne at the time was severely wounded, but he got well enough to be relieved of his command. The brigade commander was relieved of his command, and the division commander of the Americal Division was relieved of his command. And it was something that just absolutely seared into the minds of people. And to make matters worse, after the fight, the relief company that arrived decided to burn the bodies of the VC. And so there were war crimes committed. And so that got into the legal stuff. So it was truly a disaster all the way around. There's a book, Sappers in the Wire, that talks about Firebase Marianne, and it's hard reading. It's hard to read. So at any rate, the other thing that happened while I was in Vietnam was in October of 1971, we had a typhoon hit South Vietnam, Typhoon Hester. Now, I grew up in Pensacola, and we experienced hurricanes, but in all of my time of living there during the 60s, we never had to evacuate we never had serious damage or whatever. So now I travel 9,000 miles to South Vietnam, to possibly get blown up by Typhoon Hester. And it really was a bad typhoon, 105 mile per hour winds. It destroyed over 200 aircraft. It totally wiped out communications, power, water, and all of that stuff happened. Fortunately, we only lost 3 soldiers killed, but it was spend the night in the bunker. And and what I got to do right before I left was there were 3 officers, I was one of them, that were charged with going around to all of our base camps within the brigade area and identify what had to be fixed, who was going to do it, and what was the priority to reestablish communications, power, defensive perimeters, and all of that. So that was high adventure. So that was my first and second overseas tour. The next piece that I want to talk about is one of my all-time favorite stateside assignments. And that was at a place called Fortress Monroe in Virginia. And Fortress Monroe was unique in the entire Army because it was the only post that was surrounded by a moat. And Fort Monroe was on Chesapeake Bay, right on a spit, Chesapeake Bay, and that's why it was put there. In the 1830s, it was established there, and it took 15 years to build this thing. But it was the defensive position to prevent enemy ships from coming up through into Chesapeake Bay and proceeding on. But it had a moat. And the interesting thing about that moat was, I mentioned it was built primarily in 1931 and completed in 1834. And the Army sent a real good engineer officer to Fortress Monroe to oversee the construction. And so he did that. And one of the things that he did was deepen the moat. And so that engineer officer lived there for 3 years, from 1831 to 1834. Anybody have any idea who that engineer officer might have been?
Robert E. Lee.
Say again?
Robert E. Lee.
You got it. Robert E. Lee helped build Fortress Monroe. It was the only Union fort in the South that was never captured by the Confederates. And they had visitors. Abraham Lincoln was there, spent some time at Fortress Monroe in 1862. And after the war, Jefferson Davis was imprisoned there for 2 years. And he literally was locked up for 2 years. And unfortunately, after my tour there, Congress decided to start closing some installations, and Fortress Monroe was one of those, and it closed in 2011. So, but what a place! What a place! Be able to drive to work, cross the bridge, over a moat, go work in your office. Great, great. My final overseas assignment in the military was in Hanau. And there I was company commander of Personnel Service Command in 3rd Army. And I had 5 commissioned officers, 4 warrant officers, and about 220 enlisted personnel to do our mission. And we had 3 separate compounds where we were located. And we provide personnel support to military and families, over 15,000. So the other place that really had a great time in, and it was again so historical, was in Heidelberg, Germany. And while I was in 3rd Armor, I later got a position down in Heidelberg, Germany. Sits right on the Neckar River, and it just a glorious, glorious place. And the really important thing that happened then was I met my wife-to-be on a blind date. So that worked out really well. Margot and I went back to Heidelberg in my 2nd career, which was the Department of the Army civilian. And I spent 21 years doing that. The last 9 of them was back in Heidelberg. And we were there for 9/11. And we were six hours in advance of Eastern time. And so we were there early afternoon, and the director of our office sent out an email saying that the Twin Towers had been hit. Shortly after, the Pentagon had been hit. Everything was on lockdown. Nobody in, nobody out. And that went on until about 8 o'clock that night. A group of us assembled in a conference room, and we watched the towers go down. When they finally released us, I drove out the main gate, and German people had brought flowers, and they were just stacked everywhere outside our main gate. When I drove through Heidelberg, there were American flags flying everywhere. Our next door neighbor, we lived in a small village in Germany. Our next door neighbor didn't speak English to speak of, but he came over and he said, "I am so sorry." And again, this brings up one of the things that I loved about my career in the Army is the people that you meet. You know, you stay with them. And to this day, we have friends still in Germany, German friends. And it was something very, very, very special. I want to wrap up, which is the why piece of this. And that is 1967, all I wanted to do was complete my bachelor's degree at University of Florida, and I wanted to go to graduate school. Well, in 1967, they started drafting graduate students, and so I chose Army. The reason why I didn't want to wait was in part due to my family upbringing, and primarily with my dad. My dad was career Navy, and he was in during World War II, and I knew very little about what he did, other than he was on a battleship at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. And he would never talk about it, but I've done a lot of reading I managed to get his, after he passed away, I got his military personnel records and looked at it. There's a very famous picture of the Pearl Harbor attack, and it shows two ships. One of them has capsized. That's the USS Oklahoma. The other one is the USS Maryland. That was the ship my dad was on. The Oklahoma capsized and took almost 480 sailors with it. Next to the Arizona, that was the greatest loss of life along Battleship Row. I look at that picture of the Maryland. My dad was there. He was on board that ship. And they couldn't get out. They were trapped because the Oklahoma was there. And the rest of the story that I found out was my dad joined the Navy in 1937, right out of high school. He went to Great Lakes. Great Lakes sent him, after graduation, directly to Pearl Harbor on board the USS Maryland. 1937 was a battleship Navy. That was a plum assignment. My dad served on the USS Maryland for 7 years. He came off it in 1944. He was at Pearl Harbor. He was involved in the invasion of Tarawa, Kwajalein, Marshall Islands, and I knew nothing about that until I found out. So it means a great deal. It means a great deal. And I will tell you, the hurt that I carried with me now to this day is about Vietnam. And Al mentioned it. You know, we were not welcome back home, not at all. And you know, many of us heard the sound baby killers back in the States. And you know, that hurts. That hurts. And I had 2 of my OCS classmates killed in Vietnam. Tall Paul Carter from Louisville, Kentucky, and Phil Gamble. Phil Gamble was in country 1 month, and he was killed. He was killed trying to save a member of his platoon and received a Silver Star. But they're gone. And there's not a lot of time that goes by that I don't think about them. But I will tell you that I am very proud to have served in the Army. And I feel very fortunate to have met the people that I did. And I think back in retirement, I don't miss the work. I don't miss the job. But I miss the people. And that's what it was all about. You know, what we did was very important. But coming in contact with so many great people, military and civilian, just meant everything in the world. So I blathered on. I know more. I don't want to take up your time. I've got a lot of information about our VFW post as well. And just briefly, the one thing is our post name is William Matthews, VFW Post 1585. If you look in the good back there about World War I, William Matthews, Private William Matthews, was the first Whatcom County soldier killed in action. And he was killed in action when his troop ship was torpedoed just off the coast of Scotland. And there were casualties of well over 200 that died. They were initially buried on a Scottish island, And it wasn't until 1920 that the family of William Matthews brought his body back, and he's now with the family gravesite. So that's all I have. Blathered on a long time. Thank you for bearing with me. Any questions? All right, Wes, I'm out of here.
I don't have a whole lot. Do I look the part? Well, I only weigh about 50 pounds more than I did then. Somewhere here. Yeah. Yeah, they're going to work on it. So I listened to these guys, wonderful guys, spent all their time in the military. I didn't. I got drafted, went in October 1967, and I was sent over to Vietnam in April of '68. I got there on the 16th, and I left on the 15th of the following year. The 15th of April. Then I spent the next 5.5 months down at Fort Hood, Texas. You know, we had second lieutenants there. We never saluted them. Well, when you're in Vietnam, you don't salute officers, especially if you're out in the boonies like I was. This is my boonie hat. I was in the 101st Airborne, first strike. There it is. That was worth $500 to a Viet Cong or an NVA soldier. I was an 11H. I learned how, it was anti-tank warfare at that time. I had a 106 recoilless rifle that I was trained on and trained others. And like he said, it had an open breech, and when you fired that thing, you didn't want to be behind it. When I was in Vietnam, I carried a 90 millimeter recoilless rifle for a while. It was okay, except for they gave me flechette rounds to shoot at bunkers. Think about that. Okay. I made friends in Vietnam too, in the Army. We had met a couple of them later. When I came home, they said, where do you want to go? I said, Fort Lewis. So they sent me to Fort Hood. I came home with a guy that I went over there with, and he was in my unit. He came back. He wanted to be down by Brownsville, Texas, and they sent him up here, of course. Yeah, that was the Army. There's not much else to tell you. I really felt that I was doing something for somebody. I felt it was an honor. And my dad was the only one in our family, of all my aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody that was either in the Army or supported it, or Navy. Most of my cousins were quite a bit older than me, and they served in World War II. By quite a bit, I meant my dad was the youngest of 8. He was born in 1906. Most of my cousins are born in 1920. So I was born in 1947. They all served. I had a couple of them that died in the war. And so it was a matter of not just being an honor for me to be something for my country other than a teenage brat, but to be worth something to a number of people. And it was about the family. It was about my father. He was deaf. He couldn't join. He worked at civil defense here in Seattle. And I got over there, and I realized that I wasn't fighting for me. I wasn't fighting for my country. I wasn't fighting for the United States. I was fighting for my buddies. When you're out in the boonies and you're there with them, You're living with these guys for months, and after a while, it's, hey, Joe, get down. And that's what it amounted to, looking out for each other. You had 1 year, and you counted the days, and you tried not to think about being short, a short timer, and it didn't work out too well because you counted the hours at the end. They wanted me to stay another month. My company was on Hamburger Hill. I got home. I had a son already. Deb and I got married before I even went in. And so when they brought the wall to Ferndale, I looked for the names of the guys I was with. I really had a hard time looking at that wall until I realized I couldn't find anybody's name that I'd been with. That was a good part. Thank you. That's me up there, 20 years old. This is what we did most of the time. Fly in a Huey. Flew in them so much I gave me an air medal. So anyhow, I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank John and Al for their contributions. And I want to thank the guys in the back there that are filming this. And I want to thank everybody for either being a veteran or knowing somebody and appreciating what they've done. And we'll see you all in December. Thank you.